Okay. Hi. I'm so excited to be here virtually at Scott Logic's open source security conversation. And first off, I'm going to say I'm sad that I'm not there. I wish I could be there. But I mean, we have internet and we have like technologies, and this is one of the reasons why this was done, so we can all like connect in real time. And this is one of the things that open source does for us. It gives us the opportunity to collaborate with a lot of people all over the world, and that's exciting. And that's how we've come to meet. And yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about designing for OSS user security. My name is Victory Brown, and I'm an open source designer, a user experience researcher for open source projects. I contribute to the Linux Foundation, Chaos Badging, and I'm part of the open source design core team, as well as the Sustain OSS podcast. And it's just been a very interesting journey for me. And one thing I've come to realize is outside open source, in the closed source environment, and also in open source, whenever we're talking about building products or softwares, the users should be front and center of our thought process and all of that, because at the end of the day, we're building these tools to be used. And that's one of the reasons, that's one of the things open source does. It's like an open source or an open code base that everybody has access to. They can study, modify, use, and reuse. Okay, so this is one of the questions that comes up a lot of times when we get into product development circle, especially if it's a product or like it's a community where they're very security conscious. So here we have three characters. We have the developer, the designer, and the owner. And the question goes, who is responsible for security? Right now, security to a lot of people, depending on where you stay. I mean, here in Nigeria, when we talk about security, first off, we think about, is your door locked? Are you safe where you are? And all of that. And then for some people, when we talk about security, they begin to think of more technical things and all of that. And the thing about security is whenever the conversation comes up, people are more focused on the technical aspects, building blocks and all of that, and never really look at security from the user's perspective. Why do we need to make this tool secure? Who are we making this tool for, right? And why do we make this tool secure for them? How would they interact with it? Now, I know that the audience is filled with developers, designers, open source contributors, and maintainers and all of that. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is the role of, or the responsibility of designing for security is rather the team's idea than one person. So not, let's say you're in a community where you're the only security conscious person there. It is expected of you to bring up the topic of security, because these tools and this software, with the globalization of technology, right, and like technology gets into every nook and cranny of the world, so also are attackers, hackers getting familiar with these new trends. So we have new trends coming up all the time. Web3 came up, and it was like Web3 was going to be the safest part of the internet. And then we still had some security breaches in Web3, right? So as much as technology advances, so the hackers and attackers also advance their skills. They're trying to meet up, as well as like meet up with security. Now, this is very important that we take note of this for open source tools or open source software, especially because, like I said, the code base is usually open to a lot of people, and different people can contribute. Different people have access to that code base. Now, let's imagine this particular software is a software that, or a database, a product that has user database. If someone has the ability to break into that software or steal the code base of that software, it's not far-fetched that they may have access to user profiles and user information. Now, I've been a victim of security breaches several times, and not just in open source, right? In like just using softwares and like interacting with technology all the time. So at the end of the day, the responsibility of designing for security falls on every member of the team. If you're security conscious and you're in a team where discussions is going on about a product, it is your responsibility to bring up the idea of security. Is this tool secure? What are our plans for designing security into this tool? So what does OSS security mean for users, right? Well, it means the same thing for everybody. Everybody that comes in contact with your products, as a user, as a developer, open source or closed source, the first thing that comes to your mind is this a safe space? We get to hear about, people talk about safe space. Is this a safe space for me to vent? Is this a safe space for my mental health? That also has like a connection or is in relations with open source software as well. Is this tool safe for me to use? This product that you've designed, is it safe for me? What does it do with my data? Is your community, if you're building an open source project and you have an OSS community, because sometimes the community, all the time, right? The community helps to promote and maintain as well as sustain this open source software. So if you have a very healthy community, you're building a project and you have a very healthy community, your community members realize that this is a safe space for me to interact with other contributors. So as well, I feel that my product or the product I'm contributing to or helping to build is also safe. And if it's not safe, it is the duty of the contributors to, you know, point out this risk and all. I think last week, towards the end of September, I gave a talk or a workshop at Design Matters on designing for OSS security, right? So one of the things that we focused more on that tool is to see how users, non-code contributors, non-technical contributors, people who have no idea what OSS means, people who are not familiar with all of these technical terms, how they can, how your product is safe enough for them. So what the discussion went on about designing a product that is safe for non-technical contributors, non-code contributors, new contributors, people who are just hearing about OSS for the first time and are very worried about what's part of their data, OSS products or OSS tools or software in general are taking from them. One of these things are like cookies, right? You visit websites and then you're forced to accept cookies. And I like to call those things deceptive design patterns, because some of those websites will not allow you to proceed and take on other actions if you do not accept cookies. And some of the times those cookies, the ones where it has to be, you have to accept it before you move on. Some of those websites taking your personal information and you may not be aware of what information they have taken. So we try to design a tool that can also work as an extension on browsers that would actually work on OSS tools to tell users or non-code contributors the extent of security or the level of security that website has and the kind of data that website stores and how they use those data. So it kind of prompted the idea for this talk. So who are the users of OSS, right? OSS is open to everybody. I remember when I started contributing early on to Fedora projects, we had like a lot of master students who were doing research contribute to OSS just for a short period of time. So they may not necessarily be full-time users of OSS, right? But for some situational or temporal need, they need to use an OSS tool, they need to contribute to OSS. So I decided to divide them into two groups, two categories: the end users, people who do not have any coding abilities, but they want to use your tools, because we have some OSS tools or softwares that are not necessarily very technical, that are just for project management, design, and all that. So you don't necessarily need to have a very intense programming knowledge to use these tools. So we have the end users, people who finally use and often test softwares. This is something that we don't necessarily see in small open source communities because they don't have the contributing power of the community to conduct researches that tests the extent to which these softwares are safe or are being used, right? So we have end users who use these products, who use this software, and then give feedback based on their usage. So those feedback could be a form of opening issues to complain about certain things, right? And then we have the developers. Now, these people are who they say they are the programmers, they are the builders of this software. They are contributing day or night or however their volunteering timeline is to a particular project, and they are building. So while they build these products, right, they tend to use it and test it as well as while they're building it. So in a way, they are also users of OSS products. Now, why is security important? There are so many reasons why security is important, but for me, these are like very two important points that I would want to buttress more on. And it says that attackers can target any application created using open source code. And once they learn that it is exposed to public, right, there's like that excitement that they can have access to that tool and use it in the way that they like. Now, we know, I don't know if we've had like encounters with our personal information being stolen. Early this year, while the whole Web3 information was coming on and like the NFT wind came in and blew everybody off their feet, there were some people who stood their grounds that they would rather not move on to Web3. And then there were others who were convinced enough to move on to Web3. And some of these people suffered a lot of security breaches on their information, privacy breaches and vulnerabilities. Some of them lost their codes to MetaMask. Some of them got hacked and their tokens were stolen, their cryptos were stolen, their NFTs were stolen as well. So security can actually, if not paid attention to, right, the wrong people, if they have access to your code base or any API that is linked to your products, can have access to those things and take informations without your permission, right? And then also a malware attack can cause extreme damage to any piece of software while compromising integrity, authenticity, and availability. And this happened a lot. Also, like I've seen on Twitter where OSS projects, not so much as people make it seem, because a lot of people talk about OSS and say, because the source code is open, it's not safe. And currently there are a lot of companies who are moving to open source and trying to gain dual licensing for their projects and have an open source aspect of their projects. And when they hear these things, it can be discouraging, right? That OSS is not safe. And also contributors, we talk a lot about OSS being the future and having new people contribute to OSS. But then we don't talk about, and then when we talk about the security vulnerabilities without balancing them, we can end up scaring contributors from contributing to this project. That happened a lot with the blockchain space. A lot of people, after their crypto had been stolen, they stopped believing in that space. So this is one of the reasons why security is important, because you as a project owner, your project is at risk of having like a bad name or losing its integrity if people say, oh, I don't believe in that software, it's not safe, I had my details stolen, or I had my system hacked when I downloaded that software. So this is really important for both the users, the developers, and the project owners to consider security while designing for OSS. So how do you design security into open source? This is, like I said, this is a mixture, a diverse audience, and I'm sure that there are project owners and developers and everybody here today. So I'm going to try to keep the points in a way that everybody is inclusive to everybody, right? So practices such as two-factor authentication add another security layer to protect against breaches. Now, this is something that this is a trend that has been going all around in software development, right? The two-factor authentication, it helps to safeguard your tools, your software, your laptop, and every data that you have saved on that particular thing. And then we also have like the cloud platform, right? And you can just save your things, your cloud, your Google Cloud, your Apple Cloud, and everything. And if someone tries to, hack in to forcefully gain access to these informations, you receive a mail asking if you try to log in using this website or something, using this device, considering that is unfamiliar to the cloud or whatever. So they send you an email and then they tell you, did you do this? If you did not, say no, and all of that. So those two-factor authentication helps to keep the user abreast of what is currently going on with their data, their information, or like with softwares where they visited, right? The next thing we have to consider is ethical design principles. Now, this is where you get designers to contribute to open source. We have like a lot of projects going on, and sometimes when we talk about having designers contribute to open source, we focus more on giving open source a good look, giving open source project a good look, having good interfaces, but it goes beyond that, right? It goes towards designing for accessibility, using different ethical design principles to drive user contribution, or to drive user contribution to your project. So when you have like a very safe space, more people will want to contribute to your project, because I can hear people talk about, oh, I use this particular software and I don't find it safe for my data, or I encounter several breaches, or there are just so many edge cases while using this particular software, right? If I've used some other software which is more safe, I am likely to tell you about that, getting you to contribute to that open source. So if you do not consider security in your open source project, your contributors might end up moving on to another project. And at the end of the day, if you don't have contributors contributing to your projects, there is no maintenance and sustainability. And at the end of the day, your projects might have to close down, right? So we have to talk about, we have to think about accessibility, think about persuasion, think about language. And these are all like I said, the workshop we conducted earlier, these are like features that we kept pushing on. Accessibility, we talked of spoke of language use in like open source projects, try to get documentation to be inclusive. So if I'm going to contribute to your project, I need to understand what it's about. So sometimes your projects might be safe, but because I took the wrong action, I ended up losing important information and losing my SSH keys and all those important keys that are needed to contribute to certain open source projects. And feedback is also an important principle when designing security into open source. You test these tools, you test the level of security, you identify what kind of tools or what kind of information you would want to protect and what you would use those information to do. So you need to communicate these things to your contributors, you need to communicate these things to your users. And if they are information that you would most likely want to keep personal or keep to the project, you can opt for a safer licensing that allows you to do things like that. Otherwise, it is important that every aspect of your project is open to contributors and users. Now, I said this before, conducting user testing frequently with security in mind. Now, it's enough for you to build the software and have people contributing and relating issues and giving feedback on it, but consistently conducting user testing is actually an important way of making sure that your open source projects are secure. And this user testing is focused strictly on putting security in mind. What kind of like I said, what kind of information is safe as this user continues to use your product or continues to use your software? What access are they giving to you concerning their personal data? What access are you collecting from them? So these are things that you need to put in mind when conducting user testing. And I would advise that during this period of user testing, the project owner, maybe a maintainer, a developer, and a designer be present. Because sometimes I feel whenever we separate these people, there tends to be a lot of chaos and conflict. So having them put together and having the interview guide or the user testing manual for whatever it is you would want to gain back from this user testing shared amongst everybody, and everybody has an understanding of what they are trying to, get back from the user. It makes it a very easy way to, conduct these things and get viable feedback. So finally, what are the solutions for end user security? What are those things that we need to consider when we're thinking of end user security? First off is education. I'm currently the lead for the Open Source Design Africa. And one of the things that we try to do is educate African designers about the importance of contributing to open source, right? And we do this. We gain more contributors in the African space, more African designers by educating them. So a lot of them know about open source. They know that open source can impact your career, but in what ways? And in what ways can I also contribute to it to gain the best impact, right? So education is important. If you need to constantly educate your users about your software and what it does, you can do that through your technical writers. And this is also a way for you to get everybody involved, everybody in your community involved in contributing to open source. Now, I like to talk about the non-code contributors because I am a non-code contributor, and education is important. So you can do this education by designing infographics that simplify these terms as well as other terms that are associated with your program. Also think about impacts. Think about the end user impact of vulnerabilities rather than the technical implications. What does the user stand to lose? And if they lose this thing, how does that impact my project? So you're thinking of the users first before you're thinking about the technicalities and technical implications, right? So it is the user's reaction to your software that opens your eyes to more of these technical implications. Next, we have clarity. Help users make safer choices and be clear about what you are doing with their data and why. People need to know these things. Before I accept a cookie on your website, before I give you my personal information, why am I doing that? And what would you do with this information? As much as it's open source, so you need to be open. If your contributors are going to be open to you and open to your project, you need to be open as well back to them. And also, finally, making a conscious effort to design security into these efforts that you've put into building security, right? So let design be front and center of your process. This means that you have a UX researcher, you have a UX designer, you have UX writer, all of these people that communicate firsthand with users and contributors in your community. So these are all like very important solutions that you can start working towards to improve OSS security in any project or any community that you contribute to. I hope that I've been able to, dissect this topic in the best way possible. So if you have questions, I'm here. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, Victory. That was, yeah, we're clapping here if you can't hear us. So applause in the room.